I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you.
Welcome to the Sooner Nation podcast. Man, we've got another stacked lineup. This is going to be another big one. We're going to do something that we hardly ever do here on the Sooner Nation podcast. We're going to start with football. We usually save football, but we're going to lead with that because I know we've talked about the big three, Kip Lewis, Isaiah Sategna, John Mateer. We talked about them in the previous episode, but I got to come back to that again and just kind of talk about the foundation that's there already laid for 2026. We've got Thunder basketball, huge win in Milwaukee on Wednesday night. We got to talk about Oklahoma basketball, unfortunately, because this team they've got issues and they're not getting better. They're the same issues over and over and over again. And we've got a lot of softball to talk about. We are weeks away from the start of the 2026 softball season. And I know there's a lot of anticipation and a lot of hope that Oklahoma returns back to the monument, right? Back to the top of the hill in that sport. And they're certainly going to be every bit in the running, not just for the SEC title, but for the national title. And we're going to talk about that core and we're going to talk about their pitching philosophy. So a lot here, a lot to break down, a lot to deal with on this episode. Thanks so much for hanging with us. Thanks for those of you that find us online, heartland-sports.com. For those of you that found us on Instagram and for our growing community on Facebook, man, I've said it for several weeks now. We're just so close. We're so close to 17,000 Facebook followers. So thank you for those of you that are in that demographic. Okay, let's jump into this. You look at championship caliber teams. Every single one of them eventually reveals the same truth, right? Stars matter, but core players matter even more. Not the names that dominate the preseason list, not the highlights that rack up the clicks on your social media feeds. The real difference makers are the ones who stabilize the system. The ones whose value doesn't live in a single stat column, but really across every layer of how a program functions. And when Oklahoma gets ready to walk into this 2026 season, the Sooners' internal foundation, it's really unusually clear compared to what we've experienced in the past, right? We're not talking about a roster built around one transcendent superstar. It's built around a trio that touches every phase of the sport. You got John Mateer, the quarterback, the offensive engine, Isaiah Sategna, the offensive multiplier and field position weapon, Kip Lewis, the defensive backbone and schematic anchor. Together, these three form what I believe is Oklahoma's most valuable asset. They have continuity with an upside. And in modern college football, in an era obsessed with the portal, obsessed with instant fixes, obsessed with, roster turnover, continuity might be the single most undervalued currency in this sport. Because programs don't collapse from lack of talent. They collapse from loss of structure. They lose the players who know the system, understand the standard, and hold everything together when the season bends under pressure. Oklahoma didn't lose that this offseason. What the Sooner program did was it reinforced it. And I think you start with the most important position in the entire sport, which is the quarterback position, and that leads us to John Mateer. On paper, Mateer's 2025 season looks it looks fine. It looks solid. It looks productive, respectable. 2,885 passing yards, 22 total touchdown, a QBR of 65.1, college football playoff appearance. That's already a successful year by any normal standard. But by the advanced metrics, you see far more interesting of a storyline here. One that suggests Oklahoma's quarterback situation, not necessarily stable, but definitely ascending. Mateer's season was effectively split into two. You got the mid-year hand injury, requires surgery. Before it, his efficiency metrics tracked like a breakout quarterback. After it, his production flattened. The averages dipped, the narrative cooled. But even with the injury factored in, Mateer still finished top 50 nationally in QBR, 44th in passing yards, 431 rushing yards, and 8 rushing touchdowns. And now, there's also here to me this is the number that actually matters. According to Pro Football Focus, Mateer ranked 4th nationally in passer rating under pressure. 4th. That's not a gimmick stat. That's not scheme. That's not protection. That's a quarterback trait that almost never lies. Comfort under chaos. It means that when the pocket collapses, when the play breaks, when defense wins, he still functions. You can teach reads. You can teach mechanics. You cannot teach that. At the same time, Mateer also ranked near the top in turnover-worthy plays when the pockets kept clean. And I think that's where the real story lives, right? That's not a red flag. I think it's a growth indicator. It tells you that he's still learning situational discipline, still refining decision-making, still adapting to speed and structure at the SEC level. In other words, he already has, I think, the hardest traits to develop. I mean, he's got them developed. He has them. What remains is refinement, not reinvention. And refinement is exactly what returning quarterbacks usually achieve. Oklahoma doesn't get a new system. It doesn't get a new leader. It gets a second-year quarterback in this system whose advanced profile says statistical growth is far more likely than regression. So that alone raises the program's floor. Now you layer in Isaiah Sategna. If Mateer is the engine, Sategna is the transmission. On the surface, he was Oklahoma's leading receiver, 67 catches, 965 yards, 8 touchdowns, plus over 300 punt return yards. But volume isn't what makes Sategna special. Efficiency is. He saw 103 targets. That's the most on the team. And targets are trust. They are where quarterbacks go when structure breaks down. And despite operating mostly on short and intermediate routes, he still averaged nearly 15 yards per catch. And here's the part that I think changes how you understand his role. 50 of his 67 receptions came within 9 yards of the line of scrimmage. That's insane. 50 of 67. And on those throws, he still averaged over 6 yards after the catch. So he's taken, a 9-yard route and turn it into 15. That's not a deep threat. That's not a slot merchant. That is a space weapon. On third down, this is crazy. On third down, he averaged 21.9 yards per reception, which means Oklahoma turned him into a player who creates explosive plays without needing risky throws. So from a team building standpoint, that's gold. Sategna allowed Oklahoma to stay aggressive without forcing danger. So they were able to generate explosiveness from safe concepts, to flip field position through punt returns. He finished with over 1,300 all-purpose yards, one of the most valuable total contributors in the entire conference. And even his flaws show up, productively, right? When you look at the data, his drop rate, higher than ideal, just over 8%. But high usage players, they always accumulate drops. They live in tight windows. They draw real defensive attention. They operate in traffic. So the advanced metrics don't describe a gadget. They describe a structural offensive piece. The kind that sustains drives. It creates hidden yards. It raises efficiency across the entire system. And when paired with a quarterback like Mateer, Sategna becomes even more dangerous. He's the safety valve that also generates explosiveness. That combination keeps offenses alive, and that they're just going to get better. They're going to get healthier. They're going to get more knowledge within the system. They're going to develop more chemistry. They're going to have more tools around them. Then you move to Kip Lewis. Of the three, probably the least flashy name, but definitely the most important defender on this team. He led Oklahoma with 76 tackles, added 10.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. But again, we're talking about surface level stuff here. When you look into advanced metrics, you see where the real value shows up. 77.2 overall Pro Football Focus grade. Top 5 among SEC linebackers. 81.5 run defense grade. That is elite. 39 stops. That's 4th in the conference. 20 total pressures as an inside linebacker. Now, stops are the real indicator. They're the plays that directly harm the opposing offense. They're failed downs, short yardage losses, drive killers. Lewis wasn't just active, he was decisive. From a schematic standpoint, he gives Oklahoma rare flexibility. He anchors the run defense. He blitzes effectively. He survives in coverage. He understands the system at a veteran level. And here's the part I think that matters the most with him. His PFF grades have risen every single season he's been at Oklahoma. So that's a development curve, not a peak, which means Lewis isn't returning as a finished product. He's returning as a player still ascending. Defenses, they tend to collapse from the middle outward. Communication breaks, run fits unravel, alignments fracture. But Lewis prevents all of that. He stabilizes the invisible infrastructure of elite defense. And there's no metric for leadership. But there are plenty for defensive efficiency. And Lewis ranks near the top in all of those. Now you put all three of these guys together. A quarterback who knows the system. A primary weapon who understands timing and spacing. A defensive centerpiece who controls the middle. Hey, that's not just a roster. That is an identity. That's how real contention starts. Not with hype, not with rankings, with continuity. And in Oklahoma, they don't need miracles in 2026. It just needs marginal gains. Mateer, cut down a few turnovers. Sategna trims off the drop rate. Lewis continues on his developmental curve. None of that requires talent breakthroughs. It just requires health, experience, and refinement. All of which are already in place. And this is the difference between projection and proof. Most contenders rely on what might happen. Oklahoma is going to rely on what it already has. And the numbers say that this trio already produces efficiently, performs against elite competition, impacts multiple phases of the game, shows sustainable statistical profiles. That's not hype, that is foundation. John Mateer gives Oklahoma stability with upside. Isaiah Sategna gives efficiency with explosiveness. Kip Lewis gives it structure with reliability. Together, they form one of the most analytically sound cores in the entire conference. Not because they're flashy, not because they're viral, but because the data says that their impact is real, repeatable, and central to how Oklahoma actually wins football games. And as we look forward to 2026, you got to think that's probably what's going to matter the most here. Let's switch over to some Thunder basketball. Let's talk good basketball before we talk bad basketball, because I've got some thoughts. I've got some thoughts about the Sooners, and they're not good. But NBA, man, it is good. There are performances in this league that feel impressive. And then there are performances that just quietly change how you understand a team. And what we saw Wednesday night in Milwaukee, it was the second kind, because Oklahoma City, they didn't just beat the Bucks 122-102 on the road. They authored a game that felt decided about 6 minutes in, right? Built around a version of SGA that no longer fits neatly into the category of superstar scorer. This was SGA as infrastructure. 40 points, 11 assists, 7 rebounds, 16 makes on 19 shots. Absurd. But the most important number from that night, it wasn't 40. It was 38-18. That was the score before Milwaukee could even find its footing. And it didn't happen because the Thunder got hot. It happened because SGA turned the opening minutes into a live demonstration of how elite players now dominate games without forcing them. The Thunder opened up on a 7-0 run, and they forced 3 turnovers in the first 4 minutes of the game. By the time Doc Rivers called his first meaningful timeout, the Bucks looked less like a home team and more like a group still kind of waiting for the scouting report to come in on their opponent. The Thunder shot nearly 70% in the opening quarter. But the shot quality, it told the real story. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was improvised. The ball movement side to side, downhill, and outward again. The kind of offensive rhythm that only exists when the defense has already lost the argument. SGA didn't take over. He organized. And that distinction matters because take over, it implies chaos. It implies volume. It implies forcing outcomes. But this was the opposite. This was calm control. He was reading the Bucks like a live whiteboard where help came from, who hesitated on switches, which defender was overplaying passing lanes. Every possession just kind of felt pre-solved, not guessed, but solved. And by the end of the first quarter, the emotional outcome of the game was already decided. Milwaukee would spend the rest of the night chasing a version of the Thunder that really had already moved on. And what made this performance historically rare wasn't the scoring volume. We've seen 40-point nights. We've seen efficiency. But we haven't seen this level of efficiency combined with this level of orchestration. SGA became just the second player since 1980. Most of you guys listening to this podcast weren't even born. Just the second player since 1980 to post 40 points and 10 assists while shooting over 80% from the field. But even that stat undersells what actually happened. Because he didn't dominate touches, he dominated decisions. Every time Milwaukee shaded a defender toward him, you've got Mitchell appearing in space. Every time the Bucks tried to help, early, Kenrich Williams found himself cutting into open lanes. Every time Giannis switched on him, SGA just calmly backed out and reset the geometry of the floor. So this wasn't scoring. Really, this was quarterbacking. And that's what the shift, I guess that is the shift that makes Oklahoma City genuinely dangerous in a way that box scores don't capture. Because he's no longer just the Thunder's best option. He's their operating system. Now here's the part of the game that I think should actually terrify the rest of the league. Oklahoma City was missing multiple core pieces. No Jalen Williams, no Alex Caruso. So you got a rotation that's held together with role players and situational lineups. It didn't matter because the Thunder didn't rely on individual brilliance to build a lead. They relied on spacing, reads, defensive discipline. And when you remove key players and the structure doesn't collapse, you're not watching a hot team. You're watching a stable team. And what Mitchell and Williams both added, scoring 18 points, those numbers, they were byproducts, not sources. They came from being in the right places at the right time inside a system that already knew where the pressure points were going to be. And that's what happens when a team's identity doesn't depend on who's available, only on how they think. And it would be easy to frame this as a Bucks failure. Milwaukee committed 8 turnovers in the first quarter. Doc Rivers even criticized his team's single pass shot offense after the game was over with. But Giannis finished with 19 and 14. But the game just never bent around him. All of this is true. But the more uncomfortable truth is that Milwaukee, they didn't play badly. What they did was they played slowly. And in today's NBA, slow is fatal. So the Thunder didn't overwhelm the Bucks with size or with athleticism. They just overwhelmed them with speed and decision-making. Every Thunder possession felt one move ahead. Every Bucks possession felt reactive. That's not a matchup problem. That is a philosophical problem. Milwaukee still plays basketball like a team trying to find the best shot. Oklahoma City plays basketball like a team that already knows where the best shot is going to be. And that difference, that is everything, because the most telling detail from this game is also the simplest. The Bucks, they never led, not once. So you got no momentum swing, no early punch, no crowd surge, no emotional shift. From the opening tip to the final horn, Oklahoma City controlled the environment. And control is the rarest form of dominance in professional sports. A lot of people can win a game. Very few teams can prevent their opponent from ever forming opposition. And the Thunder, they've quietly become one of those type of teams. Not because they're explosive, though they are. Not because they're deep. We saw Wednesday night, that's what they are as well. But it's because they dictate tempo, geometry, and emotional flow in ways that they just don't show up in the highlight packages. What they do is, as your opponent, they're going to remove your options. Every great team goes through phases, right? First, you're talented. Then you're competitive. Then you're dangerous. And then you're just inevitable. And Oklahoma City is entering into that final stage. It's this version of SGA. It doesn't need signature moments. All right? He doesn't need to take over sequences or fourth quarter heroics. He's done that and he can do that, but he can win games in the first quarter as well, on the road, without drama, without noise, without needing to remind anyone who he is. And that's the difference between a star and framework. Stars win games. Frameworks, they shape reality. And frameworks scale. They survive injuries. They survive bad shooting nights. They survive hostile arenas. They survive playoff pressure. Milwaukee didn't lose because SGA posted 40 points. They lost because Oklahoma City no longer needs him to have a 40-point night to feel in control. And I think that's the part of this situation that the rest of the league should really be paying attention to. Not the points, not the record, not the standings. The fact that the Thunder now walk into buildings and decide how the game will feel before anyone else gets to say. That's not dominance, that is authority. And authority is what real contenders eventually learn how to build. And Oklahoma City has built a lot of it. The college softball season, it's close. It is so close. We are in kind of like the preseason awards season right now. And usually when you get to this point of any season, but we're talking college softball, but when you get to this point, it usually tells you two things. First, it tells you who the sport's elite players are. Secondly, it tells you which programs are positioned to shape the national conversation before a pitch is ever thrown. For Oklahoma, the message this year, it's pretty familiar. You got 5 Sooners, 5, who were named to the 2026 USA Softball Collegiate Player of the Year Top 50 watch list. Those are Sydney Brazone, Gabby Garcia, Nelly Macaron-Morenas, Ella Parker, and Cassidy Pickering. So that total ties with Texas for the most in the country. And on the surface, that feels like another line in a long list of Oklahoma accolades. Another preseason nod, another reminder that Norman remains the center of gravity in college softball. But this list matters for a deeper reason, because it doesn't just tell you who Oklahoma's best players are, it tells you how Oklahoma is built. You got a league that's defined by depth, physicality, and attrition. The SEC has dominated this list with 24 selections, almost half. But Oklahoma's representation stands out not because of volume. 5 programs had multiple players, but because of balance. The Sooners placed players on this list from the circle, from the infield, from the outfield, and in the utility role. That's not coincidence. That is architecture. It's a snapshot of why Oklahoma remains one of the most structurally dangerous teams in the entire sport. Start in the circle, because Brazone's inclusion might be the single most important development for Oklahoma's national title outlook. She's not just a projection, she is a finished product. 3-year standout at LSU, she arrives in Norman with 486 career innings pitched, 2.02 ERA, 416 strikeouts, 3 All-SEC selections, and 2 NFCA All-American honors. So she's not learning elite softball. She's been thriving in it. And for Oklahoma, that matters because 2025 exposed one of the pressure points that even dynasties can't ignore forever. Frontline pitching depth in the SEC grind. And Brazone gives the Sooners something they didn't consistently have last year, which is a tone setter, right? A Friday night anchor, someone who can walk into Gainesville or Baton Rouge or Tuscaloosa or College Station and already know how unforgiving those environments are. She knows the hitters. She knows the travel. She knows the margin for error. And that kind of familiarity is priceless in a league where pitchers aren't given time to adjust. They're expected to survive immediately. If Brazone reaches her ceiling in Norman, she becomes one of the most impactful transfers in the entire country. Not because she's flashy, but because she stabilizes the most volatile position in the sport. And we're going to get back to pitching here in just a little while. But let's move to the infield. Gabby Garcia's name on this list, it just feels so much less like hype and more like confirmation. Think of what she did as a true freshman. She started 59 games last year. She earned third-team All-American honors by the NFCA. She made the SEC All-Defensive Team. Oh yeah, and she hit 20 home runs, 5th most amongst freshmen nationally. That's not a breakout, that is a foundation. And the reason Garcia's trajectory is so compelling to me, it's not just the power, it's where she plays. Elite shortstops who can anchor a lineup, they're rare. But elite shortstops who can hit for power in this conference, they're almost non-existent. And Garcia already profiles as one of the most complete middle infielders in the entire country. The range is there, the arm strength is there, instincts are there, and she brings legitimate game-changing offense. Now she's going into her sophomore year with a full season of SEC pitching behind her. She's seen it. And that's the moment where stars usually become national figures because the game begins to slow down a little bit. The reads get cleaner and the confidence becomes permanent. So Garcia she's not just Oklahoma's shortstop. She's the kind of player entire lineups get built around. Then there's Nelly McEnroe-Morenas, quietly one of the most reliable bats in the program. Redshirt freshman last year. Started 61 games at third base, hit .339, launched 15 home runs. And she landed on the NFCA Freshman of the Year top 25 list. That kind of production at corner infield, yeah, it matters. Because that's where run creation lives. That's where mistakes get punished. That's where rallies survive. McEnroe-Morenas gives Oklahoma something every elite team needs, but rarely advertises. She gives them consistency. She doesn't swing games with one moment. She shapes them with 6 quality at-bats in a weekend on a roster that's full of stars. She might be the most quietly indispensable piece of this lineup. Then there's Ella Parker. If Nelly's quiet, Ella Parker is just loud. If Oklahoma's offense has a heartbeat, it belongs to her. Coming off a first-team All-American season, she hit .423, 15 home runs, 53 RBIs. Women's College World Series All-Tournament team. I mean, you got the iconic 2-home run performance against Tennessee. And Carolyn Pickens in the circle for the Vols, that's no slouch, right? One of the best pitchers in the country. But Parker's real value goes beyond numbers. She's a utility player in the purest sense that she gives Patty Gasso lineup freedom, defensive flexibility, strategic optionality. And she can hit anywhere. She can play multiple positions. and she doesn't shrink when the stage gets bigger. With a career batting average of .419, Parker enters this season as one of the most efficient hitters in the entire sport and one of the most difficult outs in this conference. But you also have Cassidy Pickering there, who probably has the most complete resume on this list, if we're being honest. First team All-American, first team All-Conference, academic All-American. So you got a rare combination of elite performance on the field and elite discipline off the field. She's a .391 career hitter, 30 home runs, over 100 RBIs in just 125 games started. But again, her true value is not power, it's control. She sees pitches. She extends the count. She forces mistakes. In a conference where bullpens are deep and matchups, well, they're everything. Pickering doesn't just produce. She dictates tempo. She decides when innings are able to breathe. She decides when the pitcher has to rush. She decides when defenses crack. And those players, they don't always lead SportsCenter, but they do win championships. And if you zoom out on all this, because that's what we like to do, preseason watch lists, they don't guarantee anything, right? They don't win regionals. They don't survive super regionals. They don't lift trophies in Oklahoma City. But they do reveal infrastructure. And having 5 players on the USA Softball Top 50 watch list, it tells you something very specific about Oklahoma. This program isn't built around one superstar. It's built around layers. You got elite pitching, you got elite middle infield, you got elite corner production, you got elite lineup control, you got elite unity here. That's not just roster luck, that is system design. And it also reinforces something bigger about Oklahoma going into this 2026 season. They're not trying to prove that they belong in this conference. They are shaping the national title conversation from within the conference. Yeah, you got the top 25 finalists going to be announced late April, and then the awards going to be revealed ahead of the Women's College World Series. Would it be really surprising if Oklahoma didn't have multiple players still standing deep into that process? Because once again, the sport's biggest individual awards and its biggest team goals, they're intersecting in Norman. And historically, that's where champions, they tend to live there. Not in flash, not in hype, but in structure, in balance, in programs that don't rely on one player to be perfect because the system already knows how to carry the weight. And Oklahoma, well, Oklahoma looks built to do exactly that. Yeah, so we're going to stick with softball for this next segment as well, because I want to get into the pitching blueprint because it's different. This will be different than any recent year with Patty Gasso. And I'm a fan of what they're doing with this pitching staff, but it's going to be different. And, there's a temptation when you're previewing Oklahoma pitching for 2026, that really to start at the top, right? To circle the transfer portal names, ask who's going to be the ace. Well, we know who that's going to be. Hey, who gets the ball on Friday night? Yeah, we know that answer. And you want to look at whether this staff has that pitcher. Well, the one who can bend the entire postseason around her will. But the temptation to have that conversation right here at the start, I think that misses the point. Because the story of Oklahoma's 2026 pitching staff, it's not about a single arm. It's about architecture. That's a word we used in the previous segment as well. It's about how Patty Gasso and Jennifer Rocha have quietly built one of the most adaptable, resilient, and strategically flexible pitching rooms in the entire country. At a moment when college softball is no longer rewarding just simplicity. This staff, it wasn't assembled to dominate in just one specific way, right? It was built to survive everything. And for the first time in years, Oklahoma enters a season without a clear program-grown ace entrenched at the top of the depth chart. And that's not a flaw. That's a reflection of how the sport and Oklahoma's place within it has evolved. The days of riding one pitcher for 70% of the innings for a season, they're over. The SEC doesn't allow it. Oklahoma learned that last year. The Women's College World Series, they punished that. And Patty Gasso has acknowledged this shift openly. Oklahoma is no longer chasing one superstar in the circle. They're building a system. A system that's going to give you multiple pitchers, multiple styles, overlapping roles, and you got built-in redundancy. It's going to be less about hierarchy and more about leverage. And every great staff still needs anchors, pitchers who steady the room when everything else is in motion. And for Oklahoma, I think that stability comes from Kirsten Deal and Audrey Lowry. Not the biggest names, but they are constants on this team. Deal enters her senior season probably as the last true link to Oklahoma's recent championship past, right? She owns national title rings. She understands the expectations. She understands the emotional economy of pitching, not just in Norman, but in Oklahoma City. And when you look at her numbers from 2025, 10-2 record, 3.42 ERA, right? They don't leap off the page in an era that's obsessed with velocity and strikeouts. But her value has never lived on a stat sheet, right? Deal offers predictability. You know she's going to be calm. You know you can trust her. You know she works the edges. You know she induces weak contact. And that allows elite defenses to function at their best. And you got a staff that's filled with max effort arms. Her presence, it's not just useful, it's strategic, right? She changes the pace. She's going to disrupt the timing. And that gives Oklahoma a control option when the moment demands stability instead of power. Now, Lowry, meanwhile, she represents the bridge between stability and growth. As a freshman in 2025, she quietly went 6-0 with a 3.09 ERA, often getting some relief work in that demands poise more than dominance. And what separated Lowry wasn't just raw stuff. I think it was composure, especially for a youngster, right? She slowed games down. She navigated traffic. She didn't unravel when innings tightened around her. And those traits tend to matter more in May than they do in February. And when you're entering this 2026 season, Lowry looks less like a depth piece and more like a trusted problem solver. So someone Rocha can turn to when the momentum needs to be arrested, right? And again, a deep staff, that role is invaluable. So if Dill and Lowry anchor the room, then Brisson and Gacchino, they redefine the ceiling here. We talked about Brisson already, arriving from LSU, one of the most accomplished transfers Oklahoma has added in years. Two-time All-American, deep SEC experience. Think about Maxwell coming from Oklahoma State. This is better than that. You got hundreds of innings against elite competition. And more importantly, she brings something that Oklahoma needed badly after last season, right? You got innings that don't feel volatile. Her game is built on efficiency. She lives low in the zone, so she trusts her drop ball. She understands how to pitch deep into games without chasing strikeouts. So her numbers in the SEC, they're not built against soft schedules. They were earned in one of the most unforgiving environments in the sport. So now at Oklahoma, she doesn't need to be heroic. She just needs to be reliable. And that's where she thrives. Now, Gacchino, she offers the contrast. Where Brisson works south, Gacchino works north. She's a strikeout pitcher by nature, armed with a rise ball that forces uncomfortable decisions. All-American as a freshman at Ole Miss. She wasn't just about talent. You see competitiveness here. She's already pitched through failure. She's through adjustments. She's through SEC pressure. And so together, these two give Oklahoma something that very few teams can prepare for in a single weekend. Think about this. Hitters, they got to adjust to ground ball pressure one day. Then they're forced to recalibrate eye levels the next day. And over a series, that variability, it compounds. You're going to have extra fatigue. You're going to have confidence eroding. So this isn't about replacing, the dominance that you had in the circle last year. I mean, Sam Landry was great. You're not trying to replicate that. What you're trying to do is create sustained discomfort. And that's where Oklahoma's real advantage lives here, because what separates this staff from most, it's not just the top end talent. It's what that talent allows the program not to do. So with Persona and Gacino handling the frontline responsibilities, the Sooners can manage innings intelligently. So Dill doesn't have to overextend. Lowry can continue to grow without being rushed. The freshmen you got coming in, they can develop inside structure instead of chaos. So that's where like Alyssa Parker and Berkeley Zach, that's where they enter the picture, right? Parker arrives as one of the most highly touted recruits in the country, the top rated pitcher in the 2025 class, the kind of arm that could accelerate timelines if needed. And Zach, she brings a completely different look, a tempo disruptor with a changeup that kind of profiles as a postseason weapon. But neither is going to be asked to save a season as freshmen. Both are being developed with intention. So that patience is a luxury that most programs don't have. And it's the difference between depth that looks good on paper and depth that actually survives May. The real question facing Oklahoma in 2026, it's not how many pitchers the Sooners have, it's how many true weekend options emerge. A true weekend option that's not defined by ERA, it's defined by who can start against elite lineups, who can navigate adjustments, who can handle pressure, and who can respond when plan A fails. History suggests you probably need 3 of those, maybe 4. If you want to win a championship without flirting with disaster. Person, there's 1. Gacino, there's 2. Dill and Lowry offers situational answers. Someone else, maybe Parker, they may force their way into this conversation. But when you're talking about Oklahoma's pitching for 2026, what you have to keep in mind is that depth is not the destination, it's the vehicle. And there's nothing about this staff that makes sense without context. This conference offers no weekends off. There's no series in the SEC where you can steal innings. Every lineup in this conference is going to be dangerous. Every road trip feels like it's going to be a test. Oklahoma, that response, it's not to be out-muscled in this league. It's to outthink it. Different starters across the weekend. Matchup-based bullpen usage. Rotations designed to peak in June instead of dominate in April. So what you want here, you want health, not headlines. Health is the priority. And you got that environment, predictability, it's a liability. In Oklahoma, they've eliminated that. This pitching staff, it's not built for nostalgia. It's built for right now. It values adaptability over star power. It rolls over resumes. Sustainability over spectacle. It's designed to absorb the adversity that this conference brings and allow you to pivot without panic. And you do all that, you arrive at the postseason with options instead of questions. And that's how championships are won in what has transformed into this new modern age of college softball. Oklahoma doesn't need one pitcher to be great. It needs several to be ready. And in 2026, I think that's probably going to be the most dangerous thing about this team for the entire sport of college softball. Wow, we're going to take this thing almost a full hour. It's been a hot minute since we gave you a full hour of podcasting, but we can't leave without talking about men's hoops because there's a pattern here, and that's a problem. It's a pattern that Oklahoma can't escape. And when you think about the loss at South Carolina on Tuesday night, there are 2 kinds of basketball losses. They're the ones that hurt because they're close, right? There's the buzzer beaters, the missed free throws, the nights where one possession decides everything. And then you walk out thinking, man, that could have gone either way. And then there are the losses that hurt because they just feel familiar. And when you look at the 85-76 loss to South Carolina, the team that was picked last in the SEC, it falls squarely into that second category. Not because the score was embarrassing, not because the opponent was unbeatable, but just because the shape of the loss, the way it unfolded, the problems it exposed, and the questions that it raised. I mean, it's become depressingly predictable. Sooners start with an 11-0 deficit. They never led the entire game. You got cold shooting from long range. You got a thin rotation. Another night where Xavier Brown plays well, and it just doesn't matter. That's not one bad game. That is a blueprint for Oklahoma basketball. Now you're sitting on 5 straight losses into SEC play. Oklahoma's no longer dealing with isolated issues. The Sooners are staring directly at the pattern that they've not been able to break for nearly 4 seasons. South Carolina didn't beat Oklahoma with brilliance. They beat them with structure. The Gamecocks had all 5 starters in double figures. Meechie Johnson lived at the free throw line. Free throw line. Kobe Knox, timely shots. Elijah Strong owned the front court. They built an 11-0 lead in the first 2.5 minutes of the game, and then they never trailed. And that detail matters more than the final score because that tells you how you got to the final score. Oklahoma spent 40 minutes chasing a game that was already tilted against them from the opening tip. And in the SEC, that is not a comeback story waiting to happen. That's what's called a slow bleed. This was not a collapse. It was a controlled suffocation. The Sooners shot 19% from 3. 19! 5 of 27. Nigel Pack, one of the best shooters on the roster, was 0 for 7. And it's not like they were bad looks either. We're not talking about desperation heaves. These are open shots, in rhythm, system shots. The kind that you have to hit on the road just to survive. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The 3-point shooting, that wasn't the problem. It was just a symptom. When a team falls behind 11-0 immediately, everything changes. Shot selection tightens. Pace speeds up. Players press. Offense becomes about erasing deficits instead of creating advantages. That's how you end up with rushed threes. That's how you end up with the long rebounds, transition defense breaking down. And a game that always feels like it's slipping just beyond reach. This is where Oklahoma basketball keeps finding itself over and over and again. Slow starts, reactive basketball, playing from behind. It happened against Florida, and it happened again against South Carolina. This happened across multiple seasons now under Porter Moser. Different rosters, different guards, same script. I think the most telling number from Tuesday night is not the shooting percentage. It's this right here. Oklahoma never led. We've mentioned it. They never led. Not once. That's not bad luck. That has become their identity. The Sooners, they did some things well. Xavier Brown, 22 points. Tay Davis, 20 points. Darian Reed gives you 13. So right there, you got 55 of your 76 points from 3 players. So on paper, that should be enough to be competitive. But Oklahoma got 5 bench points. 5 from the bench. A 7-man rotation in the SEC, that's not a strategy. That is a survival tactic. And survival is not enough in this league. By the second half, you could see it start to happen, right? Legs get heavy, closeouts get slower, rotations a half a step late. South Carolina didn't explode in the second half. They just simply stayed organized while Oklahoma wore down. That's what depth does. It doesn't win you games early, but it wins them quietly. In Oklahoma, they just don't have it. And again, this is where the conversation has to turn back to Porter Moser. It has to. Not because one loss defines a coach, but because 5 straight conference losses, following years of similar patterns, define a program's trajectory. Mosher didn't forget how to coach. He didn't suddenly lose the locker room overnight, but at some point, competitive but losing stops being progress and it starts being stagnation. Oklahoma's 1-5 in SEC play. They're tied for last place in the conference with LSU. This is a program that moved into the SEC expecting growing pains, but not bottom tier results. And I think the most frustrating part for Oklahoma fans, it's not that the team loses, but it's how they lose. They lose by starting slow. They lose by struggling to score in bunches. They lose by relying on two guards to carry everything. They lose by playing short rotations. They lose by looking organized for stretches and then helpless for others. And that's been the story for 4 seasons. And there's always going to be context. You got injuries, you got transfers, you got youth, new systems, stronger conference. All of that, yeah, it's real, but so is this. Oklahoma has not had a winning conference record under Porter Moser. Not once. That's not a hot take. That's a data point. Last season, bottom time, you got the late surge, you got an NCAA tournament appearance, you got a player in Jeremiah Fears who could flip games on his own. That kind of player changes everything. This roster doesn't have that safety net, which means there's no cavalry coming. There's no magical March run waiting to erase what happened in January. No single star who can just rewrite the season here. What Oklahoma has is what it's been showing. The Sooners have effort, a little bit of structure, they've got competitiveness, and they don't have enough margin. I mean, look, the South Carolina game, it didn't feel like a breaking point. It felt like a confirmation. Confirmation that Oklahoma's biggest problem isn't shooting. It's not turnovers. It's not even defense. It's just that they keep showing up to games already behind. Not necessarily on the scoreboard, but in the margins, in depth, in confidence, in shot creation, in adaptability. Good teams respond to early punches. Great teams, they throw the punches. Oklahoma, they just absorb them. And then they spend the rest of the night trying to climb uphill. And that's the real danger with this season. Not that the Sooners are losing, but they're losing in a way that suggests they just don't have a different version of themselves to reach for. There's no second gear. There's no alternate identity. There's no, if this doesn't work, we'll do this instead. It's just the same pattern. It's repeating. 5 straight losses, it doesn't mean the season's over, but it does mean Oklahoma has run out of excuses. Because at some point, slow starts stop being bad nights. They just become who you are. That's it. That's it for this episode. Thanks so much for hanging out with us, man. We did go deep. I told you it was going to be packed. Hope you come back after the weekend. We do have more coming up with our softball previews. You can find information every day, heartland-sports.com. Find us on Facebook. Like I said, we're almost to 17,000. We've started subscriber content there that takes you a little bit deeper into detail, into research with what we're doing in terms of breaking down plays, breaking down games, breaking down players. So make sure you check that out as well. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Boomer Sooners. But I would walk 500